I'm Fred Kemp. I'm President and CEO of the Atlantic Council, and I'm pleased to welcome you all to our private event today, Fireside Chat with United States Representative Will Hurd on the future of space. If you look very carefully at Will Hurd's square here in the Hollywood Squares and Gallery View, you'll see a little street sign over his right-hand shoulder. Yes, there it is. Will Hurd, is it Drive? And he just shared with us that the street was named for him in Eagle Pass, Texas. So this is the kind of thing that I love in this space, is you get to know about people's space, you're invited into their homes. People talk about social distancing. We haven't found that at the Atlantic Council. We've had an exponential growth in the people we're bringing together around the world, more than 300 events, more than 700,000 people we've convened since the middle of March. But I like these smaller events even more. I like it when we can get some experts in the room and have some rich conversation. And so I feel that in a way we've been brought closer together by this period of time, not dragged further apart. An array of private sector feats has renewed and increased the public's interest in the exploration of space. The expansion of commercial involvement in the area has also introduced many new challenges. There are public-private partnerships to organize vast troves of data to transmit, to process, and to store, and missions and trajectories to coordinate between rival companies and nations. I'll come back to Teresa Carlson and introduce her in a minute, but we're just delighted that Teresa, Vice President of Sales at Amazon Web Services Worldwide Public Sector, will be representing commercial interests in space on this call. But I'll come back to that in a second. The private sector's involvement also introduces a complex new element to the realm that has traditionally been an arena for great power competition and sometimes cooperation. Successfully navigating these new dynamics requires new policies, new technologies, and new lines of communication, and their ultimate impact on everyday citizens remains uncertain. Here to help us understand where we are and where we need to go and the actions required to get us there are David Bray of the Atlantic Council, Teresa Carlson of AWS, and United States Representative Will Hurd. So let me briefly introduce our speakers to you. First of all, our own David Bray, Director of the GeoTech Center, will be moderating the discussion. We launched the center this year. It was already doing work last year, as is the way one does things in this realm, and it's off to a great start. Whether or not we are in Mars orbit yet, you can discuss that later, David. But we're off to a great start. Teresa Carlson, Vice President of Sales at AWS Worldwide Public Sector, will be representing commercial interests. She's also one of the co-chairs of the GeoTech Commission, a commission we've created alongside our GeoTech Center, and it's a group of dedicated public and private sector leaders working on policy recommendations for addressing changes brought on by a variety of emerging technologies. And representing government interests is, of course, Representative Hurd from Texas 23rd District, I believe. And Congressman Hurd, we've done a lot with you at the Atlantic Council over the years. We've been really delighted to work with you from Washington, D.C. to Ukraine. So it's great to have you with us again. Among other appointments, Representative Hurd is a ranking member on the Subcommittee on Intelligence Modernization and Readiness in the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, and he has long been a fierce advocate for strategic, comprehensive, and long-term policies addressing many of the impending technological challenges facing our country and the world. So with that, let me turn over to David to get us started. And you may want to share a little bit what's your background too, David. It looks space-like and at sunset.
Yes, well, thank you, Fred, for that very gracious introduction of our panel. And yes, we are here to talk today about the future of space. You asked whether or not we're in Mars orbit. I would say there has never been a better time to be heading to Mars right now. As we know, the planets are allowing a chance to go to that orbit. But we're here to talk today because we're increasingly seeing private sector's efforts and pioneering efforts when it comes to space, which raises questions about what can the public sector do to make it more viable and more promotive of innovation and industry efforts in space. And so I'm going to turn first to Congressman Hurd. Again, thank you, Congressman Hurd, for joining us. And I would ask for, do you have thoughts about what we can do to continue to not only stay ahead, but actually accelerate our efforts in space to promote innovation and industry efforts?
Sure, it's always a pleasure to be with y'all, and this is not a shameless plug for Fred, but this is what's on my desk right now. It's one of my favorite books by a riveting author.
Time to come back on screen again.
Yeah, but I love what y'all do, and sometimes people are like, why the hell is Will Hurd talking about space, right? Let's start with that, and it begins with my district. Blue Origin has one of their launch sites in my district. And so the fact that from the beginning of my time in Congress, most of my focus has been on commercial launch and how we're able to help that. And so that's really where I got my teeth wet. And then in moving into Congress and being on the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, I've been involved in how the Intelligence Committee talks about is overhead architecture. And one of the things you learned is that space is now a contested domain. And there was a recent DIA report that came out, I think it's Challenges of Security in Space was the title, that really talks about this concept of counter space. And so what can the public sector be doing to make sure that we have innovations in space is making sure that our great American companies are able to operate up there in space, unmolested by adversaries. And this is everything from, electronic warfare, we're messing with the spectrum around devices, to actually kinetic operations and taking them out. And this is no longer just about how can U.S. innovation happen. The Chinese are trying to outpace us. Over the last 2 years, they've put more satellites, more spaceships into space than any other country, including us. Just this year alone, they're looking to put 60 spacecrafts into space over 40 launches. So that's why everything from launch capability, this concept of Blue Origin, of a space elevator, right? How you move in space requires different fuel than getting into space. We know about the 3 countries racing to Mars right now. And all of this is also impacted. We forget how much space enables what we do on the ground, things like GPS, weapon systems, command and control. And so space supported operations here on terrestrial systems is important as well. So I want to make sure the federal government is doing everything we can to protect our architecture in space so that we can have great companies continue to innovate.
Excellent, and thank you, Representative Hurd, and I really appreciate the connection too that you said that it goes right back to your district, but also to all of us on the ground here in the United States making this happen, and thinking about, like you said, how we can continue to do this in a way that is not contested or disturbed by malevolent actors. Teresa, I would one, thank you for joining us as well, Teresa, and I would like to ask for your similar thoughts about what we can do from a private sector perspective to focus on innovation and industry efforts in space and sort of take it to the next level beyond the launch pad, but really sort of the booster stage, if that, so to speak.
Well, thank you, David, so much. And like Representative Hurd said, it's great to be here today. And I think we both really appreciate you all having this conversation about space. It is really important. And it's hard to believe that it's been 50 years since we landed on the moon. It's kind of unbelievable. And we're still learning from that experience today, even. And I actually can't think of a more exciting time for space right now to be working with the government and commercial sector customers on space initiatives. And as Congressman Hurd just mentioned, space is not just about trying to understand what exists beyond Earth, but it's there's so many benefits for space exploration for us here on Earth to understand and learn. And AWS is not new to this market. One of my favorite stories, I started our public sector business in 2010, And NASA JPL was one of our earlier customers, and they actually came to us and said, hey, we need a GovCloud region that's ITAR ready. And we said, okay, we should build that. And so in 2011, we launched the first GovCloud ITAR region so they could process and store and disseminate ITAR classifications of data for space missions, which has been a lot of fun. And since that time, we've done hundreds of workloads working with groups across NASA, Air Force Space Command, NRO, NGA, and others. And I have to admit, for me, it is fun and exciting. It was an area early on that I personally didn't know that much about. And now I've found myself to be such a fan. And if you're anywhere inside of AWS, I'll call it the space geeks. They watch and pay attention to everything, which is kind of cool and super interesting, of course, for us. But not only have we done like work over the last few years, we're also very involved in projects like Artemis. And we also do work with the classified communities on the intel side and defense, which I think is really important to keep our nation safe as well as we learn and understand about our adversaries and how do we, again, what kind of applications and tooling do we need. And with AWS, the other element for us is we're building on behalf of our customers. And we actually heard from our intelligence community customers a few years ago that they wanted and needed a managed ground station capability, because what we hear often is we need speed and agility in this, this market segment because it moves too slowly. So tools like cloud computing, I think, will help to revolutionize what we can do in space, because you again, if you think about the ability to not own everything, but build out, do experimentation, and then again, pay for only what you use, that's a necessary element of being able to move faster and having that quick experimentation. And David, in 2018, we launched something called the AWS Ground Station, which was kind of our first new service outside of things that our space customers already use. And Ground Station is a fully managed service that lets government commercial customers control satellite communications, process the data, and scale their operations without having to go out again and buy all that. And they can also work across other tools and applications. And then it's fun. We see hundreds of new startups coming out in this arena. I see a lot of venture capitalists now actually funding and looking at how do they take advantage and fund and back new startups in this arena. Groups like Capella, which is a great, Capella Space is a startup that's now running all on AWS. So that's a lot of fun for us to work with these new startups and understand them. And these services, like I said, are really going to be critical for us in the defense and intelligence monitoring and decision making. And I want to thank Congress for actually, because now we have U.S. Space Force, and we're very committed to working with Space Force on their new applications and what they're trying to achieve from a mission, which I think is going to be a lot of fun. And in fact, I was the beneficiary of Space Force because my new leader of my aerospace and satellite business unit that I announced a few weeks ago is going to be headed up by retired General Clint Crozier, who was one of the individuals that helped formulate that whole program. And I kind of stole him only because he retired. So he's now coming, and we're very excited. He's going to start with us August, so just around the corner. And he's going to help us understand how we better serve our customers around these tools that space can provide, like IoT and edge computing. I just had a full day review with my team, and I could have had 3 days because it was so exciting kind of understanding the applications and capabilities that we've really not even started to scratch the surface on. So again, a lot that we can do here and a lot that we can be doing to even protect our nation even more.
Thank you, Teresa. I really appreciate that. That's a truly impressive accomplishment of a series of accomplishments. And just thinking that now we can provide, like you said, cloud-based ground stations. I'm remembering my days from the intelligence community where that was dreamed about probably about 5 or 8 years ago. And so it's now a reality.
So true.
Is impressive. As I turn to Representative Hurd, I want to both thank our private audience that has joined us. If you have things that you would like me to incorporate into my questions for either Congressman Hurd or Teresa, you can type them in the chat. I will remind folks that this is on the record. And so Representative Hurd, you know, Teresa has just sort of shared sort of the robust capabilities that are becoming available from the private sector. I do have a question. You know, a lot of the laws and regulations that we have for space were written in an era in which we assumed the only actors were government. So if you were to make recommendations to your colleagues on the Hill as to what could the public sector do to make space more attractive to innovators and entrepreneurs, what would you recommend?
Well, I think it's something we're already supposed to follow, and that's buy, not build, right? You know, we have, I never would have thought that my time in Congress, I'd be known as the IT procurement guy. But how you change and streamline how the government purchases goods and services is important. And so that principle makes sense when it comes to defending digital infrastructure. It makes sense when it comes to operating in space as well. And as Teresa just went through, look, that's all the things that she mentioned that's happening in a company. I've learned probably more about what's happening in space by touring private sector facilities than doing something with NASA or someplace else. And so part of this is don't get in the way, don't have an overly burdensome regulatory environment, work together. And again, I think the most important thing is buy, not build. But we should also be figuring out how do we ensure that we're training the folks that are going to be able, that Teresa is going to be able to hire, and people that are going to go work for Blue Origin to go into this domain that we've been operating in for a long time, but we're blossoming. And again, I'm proud. I'm part of Texas, this little town called Presidio. It's one of the poorest communities in Texas, but they had a rocket club, and they went on to some national competition and beat out some of these prep schools from the East Coast, right? And now they get to go on a bus, you know, a couple of times a year to the Blue Origin facility and literally watch people building rockets that are going into space, right? And so we have to encourage folks that are going into these programs so that we can populate these great companies and also build up a space force. And so I think that's stay out of the way, but partner, because the only way that we're going to continue, we are in a competition, period, full stop. And the only way that we're going to compete is by not breaking up great American companies. It's by working with great American companies in order to challenge folks like the Chinese. Also helping companies defend their IP. We had the Chinese consulate in Houston shut down, right? What else? What's in Houston that's important? A little old thing called Johnson Space Center, right? And so making sure that we're helping companies defend that intellectual property. We've seen an increase of illegal immigration coming across the border from Chinese nationals. That number has increased multiple fold. And, you know, they came and said, oh, we're a painter, or we're a carpenter. And they were looking for jobs in facilities in South Texas that deal with commercial space. And then when you investigate, guess what? They had a PhD in astrophysics, right? And so our companies are not only being threatened in space, they're being threatened here in intellectual property. So how do we make sure that we're defending and helping the private sector defend against these attacks are important.
Excellent. And Representative Hurd, you made me have a little bit of flashbacks, because I was fortunate enough, I was sort of a legacy of when the Cold War was going on. We had science fair competitions across the United States to find talent, even in rural areas. I was in rural Virginia. And so maybe what we need to do is actually re-accelerate like you said, the idea of science fairs and rocket fairs as a way to sort of find talent, whether it's in rural parts of the country, in urban areas, wherever it might be, and sort of link that to efforts that are going on. We also, real quick, since you talked about protecting intellectual property, which I think is so key, if you're open to it, and if not, I'm happy to help comment as well. We have a comment from Bob Gorley of OODA Loop, who actually said, what can we also do to think about the cyber side of the fact that the things in space could possibly be hacked and could be compromised as well? I don't know if you have thoughts. Is that something where government needs to take the lead, or government needs to encourage industry? Do you have thoughts about what we can do to recognize that these things, like you said, it can be both disrupted kinetically in space, but it can also be challenged cyberly as well?
Well, I'd listen to Bob Gorley and Matt DeVoe and see what those guys, how those guys.
Bob, do you want to comment a little?
On how to defend. But no, look, there is so the types of threats that you're facing in space, and while it's great that we have cloud-based ground stations here, we need cloud-based cloud stations in space in order to help to move at the speed that you need to defend against whether it's orbital threats trying to mess with the machine in space, whether it's the electronic warfare that's happening, whether something is going to try to come and touch and get access in order to manipulate the data. And so the same kinds of threats that we have, that we have the digital infrastructure on the ground, you have in the space, and it's complicated even further because it's in space, right? And so there's many things that we can be doing from defending these assets from the ground, but we're also going to now need infrastructure in space in order to help us with that. That's only going to get more complicated when you have operations in order to get more fuel, in order to do longer missions like what we're going to be going to Mars. So this is just only going to expand, and those same threats are going to be there, and that surface area of attack is only increasing. So yeah, the cyber threats are there, and that's why this industry, and I think having a Space Force to kind of focus on some of these efforts is important.
Thank you. That was very well said, Representative Hurd. And Teresa, with everything that the Congressman just shared, we talked a little bit about what AWS is doing, but of course the challenge with AWS is, of course, you operate, you're in the United States, but you also operate around the world. So what can not just the US government, but other governments that want to see space be innovative and not be constrained, say in a more surveillance state or autocratic regime, do?
Yeah.
What can AWS do to help sort of foster that international pluralism that might be needed?
Well, let me just share, there are 3 countries racing to Mars: the US, China, and the UAE. I think US should get there first. So let me just be really clear. I think the US should be driving this. And I noticed Bob made a comment over in the chat room about the cybersecurity, which Representative Hurd commented on. And I do think it's kind of naive to believe that someone wouldn't try to hack us. So it is super important in every stage of space exploration and new programs that we are assessing, evaluating, and making sure that we're putting security parameters around everything we're doing for cyber. Better, faster, cheaper, with security by design. Everything should be with security by design. And if you think about the capabilities that are available to us, David, the new IoT edge capabilities, there's ways to put sensors and look for these threats. But it has to be built from the ground and assessed over and over. The testing, and it's available. It's not the technology anymore, by the way. We see cyber threats all the time, ransomware, and these things are you can put the right tooling around this, even just backing up your applications. But in space, it's a different way that we're actually going to have to think about this. But kind of globally, when you ask me the global question, I'll answer that. Globally, there are many space missions, and we're seeing it. I was in Africa recently, South Africa. They have a whole space mission, which I thought was really exciting. We're even seeing a lot of these countries, believe it or not, outsource their government space programs to commercial entities in a much bigger way, because they don't have the capabilities. Technology is moving so fast that they want to be part of this race to get there, but they don't have the talent or the technology. So they're even kind of outsourcing some of these. Then there's also a lot of countries that we work in partnership with that are friends and allies, that it's important also to share the capabilities. And we oftentimes will let our government kind of kind of direct us a little bit as well in some of these areas, which I think is important, especially if you're working with the U.S. Federal government on these programs and efforts. But just in general, like Representative Hurd talked about the Rocket Club. Okay, we need students around the world understanding these technologies and tools. And what a great way, I love that. I may steal that idea and actually start my own little AWS Rocket Club. I think it's a great idea. And maybe a potential way to get more individuals involved in thinking about a career in space. And we're talking about it a lot more. But I just kind of want to make one more comment about the threat as I end on this statement, which is when we identify and detect threats like, hypersonic weapons, we need to be able to respond to them quickly and defend against these things. The way that we're going to be able to do that, and other nations, they have to, again, have the right technology with the support of government on the backing, but you have to make sure that you're doing this again in a fast, agile way. If we continue to use outdated technologies in this area, we're not going to be the first to get there. So again, we have to keep up with the policy and the regulations, which I know Representative Hurd is always thinking about this. He always asks the right questions. But if we've got to make sure that the FCC and others are on top of the regulations and ensuring that U.S. companies have the same priorities and efforts regulatory-wise to get there. So we appreciate Congress staying on top of these issues, which again will keep us out in front.
Teresa, I got 5 months left, so if we want to get that program into some schools, I know a few places. Where we can do it.
Let's do it.
Yeah, no, that'd be great. And David, one point, it's what the things that Teresa is talking about, and the innovation that's happening in the private sector is unbelievable, and the hubris that exists within the federal government is also a problem, thinking that they know everything, and that's one of the other problems that we have to get out of. And I saw in the chat session that said, "Oh, well, we're working together. Why would anybody want to hack us?" It's like, are you insane? And part of the issue is we need to start thinking about what is the attacker's motivation to potentially get some information. And we're dealing with an issue in West Texas right now where a Chinese-owned company by a former general of the People's Liberation Army is going to be able to connect to the Texas grid. Now, the folks at ERCOT who manage the grid have said, well, we can protect, we can defend against that. Well, they may not be able to bring the entire grid down, but they could impact our power for a finite period of time to enable something else, right? And so these are the kinds of we don't understand kind of these potential motivations. And like Teresa said, the old infrastructure and technology that is still in use. When I speak at schools, I talk about Voyager 1, the first man-made object that's gone into interstellar space. That happened literally 43 years ago. It was a year before I was born. And you know how much memory they had on Voyager 1? 40 kilobytes. Yeah,
not a lot.
Right? And we're still getting stuff from there. And so yes, the cost of sorry, I'm in the Capitol and the buzzers are going. The cost to upgrade this infrastructure is going to be worth it, because this fight and this battle is so important to our livelihood and our way of life. And again, I think everybody on this call knows this. This is no longer about the United States maximizing and doing our best as a country. This is a race. This is a competition. And the only way we're going to win is if we work together and make sure that we build these systems with security in mind.
Very well said. And yes, I agree 100% that, I mean, as we saw, even with the vaccine, like, supposedly an altruistic effort to try and get the COVID-19 vaccine, there's compromise, nation state actors are going after that. So we should always assume there are motivations that we may not agree with, but are happening and impacting us. I'm going to actually, if you're open to it, both Representative Hurd and Teresa, would be interested in your thoughts. We've combining two questions we heard, which is one, should we be concerned about the impact that a recession might have on the still nascent commercial space industry? Will financing dry up, or will people sort of accelerate that? And I know probably Amazon and AWS has some thoughts there, but then similarly, how close are we to seeing commercial travel and tourism in low orbit space? So maybe I'll go initially first to Teresa and then to Representative Hurd. I mean, I know Amazon seems is quite bullish in actually that this is actually going to be viable and that the recession actually may not be a hindrance. In fact, it may actually be an opportunity, but I'd be interested in your thoughts, Teresa, if you're willing to share some.
Well, David, I think it's a really good question, and we have to worry about a recession for every individual right now and every business. So I think, again, we'd be kind of naive to say we're not sure. On our side, I'll tell you what we're doing. One for us is we are reaching out. We brought over, when we created this new aerospace and satellite division or business segment, we brought over about 100 commercial startups to bring them together, as well as all of our government kind of customers. And we're reaching out to all of them to see how we can help. You know, there are things that we are trying to do. As an example, if we can help some of them that we see they have great solutions, but they may need help with technology, we'll give them grants, we'll provide technology support. We do a lot of that as much as we can for in kind, if they can accept it, and to help them get going. We have multiple partner programs to help make sure. Now, again, that's not always the case. Many times also, if they ask me, I'll put them together with venture capital or private equity firms. So we will do whatever we can to keep these companies going because we need them. And there's a lot of money out there still, by the way. There's tons of venture capital and private equity funding. They are still, I've talked to a lot of them, they're still looking for companies to invest in. I'm pushing really hard investments in the aerospace and satellite industry all across space. So if anybody's out there and you need help, give us a call. We'll do our very best to put you with the right investor or support you on the technology front. So that's one piece. You know, we're not looking on the AWS side yet. We believe it's going to happen. If you listen to my boss, Jeff, he said for a long time, he believes we're going to have a whole new economy in space. So it looks like we are getting much closer, but I would tell you, I am not the expert. I'm more about our business applications. Now, I will tell you, however, with some of my partners, like you, Martin, Rick Ambrose, and others, we've talked about, you know, eventually this is going to be so consumer, and people are going to want that same Netflix, Hulu, and Amazon Prime experience as they have here on Earth. So you're going to see us continue to think about new ways to use our tools as we continue on these missions, though. So, you know, if I were a betting person, which I don't gamble in Las Vegas, it's just not my thing. But I would say we're much closer, David, in doing these kind of individual trips to space.
Thank you, Teresa. And Representative Hurd, recognizing you said you only have 5 more months, but I have a 3-year-old that would also like to join the Rocky Club. Do you have thoughts about what government could do if there's a need to encourage more investment in space?
Yeah, so look, I think the investment is there, right? When you look at the appropriations in the federal government for the last couple of years, it's been increased, especially for some of these security related issues. This week we're debating the IAA, the intelligence authorization, and you know it's going to ultimately be supportive of this industry. We're all going to be impacted by the effects of COVID-19 and this pandemic, but we're resilient, and I do believe we're going to come out of this better than when we went in, and so we're all going to be impacted by this. But for the previous question, I think that people have already bought their tickets on Blue Origin as well as SpaceX to go into space, so that's coming, right?
Yeah,
yeah.
Coming.
You know, and look, I've set in the human orbital that is going into space, and it's like super comfy. So it's going to be here, and this notion, you know, the fact that you can talk about a space elevator to the moon, right? This is not some cartoonish, you know, crazy idea. It's something that is being worked out and being discussed. And you know, one area, and I see on the chat there was some talk about quantum communications and quantum computing. you know, everyone always wants to talk about what is the Sputnik moment, what's the Sputnik moment in cybersecurity, what's the next Sputnik moment in this. Well, I think when the Chinese were able to demonstrate an atom can be in, you know, the two places at the same time, and they did that in space for quantum communications. I don't think that got enough focus and attention, and not having systems that are resilient to quantum computing, having quantum resilient encryption is something that's going to be important. And whoever achieves quantum first, there's no second place. And so this is something that, and the ability to process and do this stuff in space, right? Because you're able to have your machines at near 0 Kelvin in order to operate. You know, space is going to have an impact and on the development of quantum, and 5G, AI, quantum. All of these things are connected, and all of this is going to be facilitated ultimately in space. So it's exciting times. I still think that the technological change we're going to see in the next 30 years is going to make the last 30 years look insignificant, and to be a part of this is pretty exciting.
Well, and I have to say, you just really, and I'll go to Teresa in a second, you really impressed me with the game of talking about quantum computing on an Atlantic Council call. That's you're probably one of the very few members of Congress that actually could talk about quantum computing. So I very much appreciate that, Representative Hurd. And two, very well said. Teresa, you had a rejoinder, so I'll go to you.
Well, we want, at AWS, we want every scientist, researcher, and developer to experiment with quantum. It's really important they start that now. In algorithm development. And we have a tool called Amazon Bracket, which provides access to multiple quantum hardware providers in one single place. And we also have AWS Center of Quantum Computing, which is in partnership with Caltech. And we just announced the Amazon Quantum Computing Lab, and that aims to connect our customers with quantum computing experts. So it's important right now. It's like when the early days I used to talk about people need to experiment with cloud. Then there's these evolutionary elements of cloud that they need to learn. And this is another example of we need many more researchers and students having the capability to experiment with quantum, to begin to build those algorithms. Because the applications that we see today are, you know, simulation, quantum computing itself, and then meteorology and the sensing of that. So these are all important elements of space. And so I agree, it's not too geeky. We should be talking about it a lot more in the US, and we need to encourage, again, that experimentation at all levels.
Excellent. And you heard it here first. Geeks of the world unite. We're needed. So, okay, as we go to the last 5 minutes, I'll sort of try to bring it home and ask both Teresa and then Representative Hurd, you have the final last word. What we can think about in terms of working to make sure that this benefits maybe local communities, farmers, amidst everything that's happening. There has been some talk, actually, just to put out as an idea, could we use space assets to actually inform what are the right paths for recovery, and that it's no longer just focusing on GDP as a measure, but maybe we should be looking at imagery from space to say, you know, are communities coming back? Or are we doing the right in terms of food production? There was also a question real quick that was asked, what needs to be done to try and actually work towards standards in space? And maybe we need, dare I say it, a nonprofit that almost does something like Energy Star or something like that, that works with industry and works with governments. So it's not too heavy, but it's an attempt to try and move to standards. But Teresa, I know AWS has put a lot of thought into how space can benefit everyone, and in fact is doing a lot, both on the positive side in terms of making sure communities are healthy, but also trying to stop human trafficking. So yeah, what are your thoughts about what we can do to make sure that space benefits everybody?
Well, if you look at the low orbit satellites and the type of activity that's even happening, I'm always amazed when I go around the world. I learn new things every day, and I admire individuals. In India, over 70% of populations dependent on farming. Almost the same in Africa. I am from a farming community. I'm from Kentucky. And I see the changes. I believe that satellite communications in space is really going to help our farmers. I think the ability to understand everything from weather trends, irrigation, what's happening with the crops, when they're ready to go to market, even supply chain elements. It's really important. also, again, how do you find, we work with so many great partners. Maxar is another one, Esri, who they use these technologies. With Maxar, we used algorithms quickly and satellite communications to be able to find refugees out at sea and rescue them in a record amount of time. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was so fast. And so just the ability to spot individuals, track, I think it's really going to be game changing. We're already seeing it. And back to the point, David, we've got to make sure that the future workforce that we have really understands the use of these capabilities at every level. And these are building blocks. They all go together. And we've got to make sure, while I totally understand and appreciate, because I've been working with government now about 25 years, that they are mainly buyers and not builders. One of the things that we think is really important in this area is also to teach our government customers and all of our partners how they use the building blocks to build quickly and not just overbuy. So I just want to kind of make that point. We do find governments they buy more than build, but we also want to teach them the elements of being able to build quickly and experiment. And the tools are getting so easy. Just like I talked about quantum bracket, we have others now for coding and development. So I think all these things are going to change our ability to have speed, agility, and security in space.
Very well said. Build smartly and experiment smartly. Representative Hurd, you have the rejoinder. What is your final thoughts on what we can do to make sure space benefits everyone?
Sure, and I gotta begin the end with one final comment on quantum. Bill Vass at Amazon AWS, the guy is brilliant. And I probably have learned more about quantum from him than anybody else, and what they're doing there is pretty exciting. And he laughed at my quantum joke. I always, my first chief of staff and best friend told me I had to stop saying this joke, but for this illustrious group, I always say, like, a quantum bit being a 1 and 0, both or neither, all at the same time, is still like a philosophical question. It's like Schrodinger's cat. Is the cat dead? Is the cat alive? And Bill appreciated that. So the way we have to work together. We have to focus on and recognize and understand that we're not going to be able to fully understand now all of the capabilities, all of the opportunities that we have. But that shouldn't prevent us from growing and working within the public and the private sector. Yes, there should be standards, right? Standards are good, and there's entities. I think the most one of the more respected entities in Washington D.C. is NIST. And I think NIST always has a role and is a good place to start. And we have to start developing these workforce chains. And this doesn't start in college. It doesn't start with a PhD. We got to be encouraging kids in middle school and even younger about the opportunities that we have. And it really is the final frontier, and the things that many of us watched as children are coming true. And so it's an exciting time to be alive. And I'm glad there's great people like Teresa and what they're doing at Amazon AWS. I'm glad there's visionaries like Jeff Bezos that are thinking about these long-term solutions. And I'm glad there's people like Bob Gorley that are thinking about how we protect these systems. And there's folks like Dr. Bray and Fred Kemp that are facilitating these conversations. So thanks for having me participate. Being able to start the day with Teresa Carlson is always a delight. So I really appreciate the time.
With you, let me tell you, what a loss having you leave Congress. What a loss. So we're just going to have to, Fred and David, we're going to have to keep him super busy. Oh,
I think we may want to talk to him about the GeoTech Commission. We might know.
I agree. He would be a fantastic add to that.
If y'all need to do some experiments in space, I'm willing to go up.
I was going to say, I want to see the first congressman in space. I think we have a nomination right here. All right. Well, thank you, Representative Hurd. We are truly appreciative for you. Thank you, Teresa Carlson. Thank you all to our august panelists and speakers here. This has really been an engaging conversation about the future of space. And we thank you all. And again, thank you, Representative Hurd. Thank you, Teresa Carlson, for all you do as positive change agents.